Mastering this pattern of thinking will cause anxiety to lose control and regain its peace. That sentence sounds bold, but look closely. It does not promise the disappearance of anxiety. It promises a shift in authority. Anxiety feels chaotic, unpredictable, overwhelming. Yet what if it is not chaos at all? What if it is order applied to the wrong things? You replay conversations long after they end. You imagine worst-case scenarios before anything has happened. You feel responsible for outcomes you cannot command. You think more, analyze more, predict more, and still arrive at no resolution. The exhaustion is not physical. It is cognitive. The mind works constantly, but the work produces tension instead of clarity. Anxiety is not random emotion. It is a structured pattern. It follows rules. It magnifies uncertainty, personalizes neutral events, assumes responsibility beyond its jurisdiction. It treats possibility as probability. It treats discomfort as danger. It treats thought as fact. This pattern feels protective, but it consumes energy without producing control. You do not need to eliminate anxiety. You need to understand the architecture that feeds it. When you see the structure clearly, its authority weakens. Not because you suppress emotion, but because you correct the thinking that sustains it. Stoicism does not ask you to ignore fear. It asks you to examine the judgment behind it. If you learn to distinguish what belongs to you from what does not, if you separate fact from interpretation, if you pause between impression and conclusion, something changes. Anxiety may still appear, but it no longer commands your decisions. What follows is not a motivational escape. It is a cognitive recalibration, a deliberate reorganization of responsibility, perception, and response. And when that reorganization begins, peace is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you construct. Anxiety is misplaced responsibility. Anxiety often begins in a place that feels noble. You want to be responsible. You want to anticipate problems. You want to protect yourself and others from failure, rejection, loss. But slowly, without noticing, responsibility expands beyond its proper boundary. You start carrying outcomes that were never yours to control. You feel responsible for how others perceive you, responsible for how events unfold in the future, responsible for preventing every possible mistake, responsible for keeping everything stable. The mind scans endlessly, searching for variables to manage. It believes that if it thinks enough, predicts enough, calculates enough, it can secure certainty. But here is the fracture. You are attempting to govern what is not under your jurisdiction. Other people's reactions, market fluctuations, unforeseen events, time itself. The more you try to command these, the tighter anxiety grips, not because you are weak, but because you are fighting the structure of reality. Stoic philosophy offers a severe but liberating filter. What depends on you? What does not? This is not a motivational slogan. It is a structural distinction. Your effort, your choices, your judgments, your actions. These belong to you. Outcomes, opinions, timing, external events. These do not. Anxiety intensifies when you blur that line. You treat the uncontrollable as if it were your responsibility. The mind becomes hypervigilant because it believes something critical is slipping through its control. But nothing is slipping. It was never assigned to you in the first place. Relief begins not when circumstances change, but when responsibility is clarified. When you stop carrying what was never yours, the mind releases unnecessary tension. You still act, you still prepare, but you no longer attempt to dominate the entire field of uncertainty. Ask yourself with precision, is this within my command, or am I trying to manage the unmanageable? That question alone begins to reorganize your mental structure. It returns you to your proper territory. Anxiety weakens when responsibility is correctly allocated, not because the world becomes predictable, but because you stop demanding that it be. Catastrophic imagination feels like preparation. Anxiety convinces you that it is protecting you. It presents catastrophic imagination as foresight. You run through worst-case scenarios, rehearse conversations that have not happened, anticipate losses that may never arrive. The mind tells you this is preparation, that you are being responsible by expecting the worst. But notice something. Real preparation ends in action. You identify a risk, you create a plan, you execute a step. Rumination does not end. It loops. It revisits the same scenario without resolution. It refines the fear, not the strategy. The body reacts as if danger is present, but no concrete action is taken. This is where anxiety disguises itself as discipline. It feels productive because thinking is occurring, yet nothing structural improves. No decision is made. No plan is implemented. Only tension increases. The mind remains in rehearsal mode, never stepping onto the stage. Stoic clarity demands distinction. Preparation addresses what can be acted upon. Rumination attempts to control what cannot be guaranteed. One builds capability. The other amplifies uncertainty. When you examine your thoughts carefully, you begin to see which pattern is operating. Ask yourself directly, is this thought leading to a specific action, or is it recycling fear? If it leads to action, take the step and close the loop. If it does not, you are witnessing imagination untethered from responsibility. The brain evolved to simulate danger as a survival mechanism. But modern life does not require constant threat rehearsal. Most imagined catastrophes never materialize. And even when difficulty appears, it rarely unfolds exactly as predicted. You do not become stronger by suffering events twice, once in imagination and once in reality. You become exhausted. Anxiety feeds on repetition without closure. When you interrupt the loop and redirect your mind toward concrete action or deliberate release, the pattern weakens. The body calms because it recognizes resolution. Peace does not come from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from refusing to rehearse it endlessly. Emotional intensity is mistaken for urgency. Anxiety amplifies everything. A small uncertainty feels like an imminent threat. A minor mistake feels like permanent damage. A delayed response feels like rejection. The body reacts quickly. The heart accelerates. The mind narrows its focus. And because the sensation is strong, you assume the situation must be critical. But intensity is not proof of importance. It is only proof of activation. The nervous system can react strongly to imagined scenarios, just as it does to real danger. When emotion surges, it demands interpretation. And if you interpret intensity as urgency, you will act impulsively. This is where many decisions go wrong. You mistake feeling pressured for being required to act immediately. You mistake discomfort for threat. You mistake agitation for clarity. Anxiety gains control, not because it is accurate, but because it is loud. Stoic discipline introduces a pause between impression and judgment. The first reaction is automatic. The conclusion is optional. When something feels urgent, you do not have to immediately obey that feeling. You can examine it. You can ask, what is the actual consequence here? What is the concrete evidence of danger? Often, when you slow down the process, the intensity decreases. Not because the situation changed, but because your interpretation did. Emotion without examination expands. Emotion questioned begins to contract. You are not required to trust every internal alarm. Some alarms signal real action. Others signal habit. The more you practice separating sensation from conclusion, the less authority anxiety holds over your behavior. Urgency should be assigned by reason, not by emotional volume. When you learn to delay interpretation, you weaken the automatic link between feeling and reaction. That space becomes your leverage. Anxiety thrives in speed. Calm grows in deliberation. When you reclaim the interval between stimulus and response, control begins to return quietly. Separate fact from interpretation. Anxiety rarely begins with facts. It begins with interpretation layered on top of facts. A message arrives without explanation. A meeting ends without clear feedback. A plan does not unfold as expected. These are neutral events, but the mind does not leave them neutral. It assigns meaning quickly, often negatively. You do not react to what happened. You react to what you believe it means. A delayed response becomes rejection. Silence becomes disapproval. A setback becomes proof of incompetence. None of these are facts. They are conclusions drawn under emotional tension. Epictetus was precise. It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. This is not poetic language. It is structural truth. Facts are limited and specific. Interpretations are expansive and creative. Anxiety thrives in that creative expansion. When you fail to separate the two, you merge them. You treat interpretation as reality. The body reacts accordingly. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, focus narrows, yet the trigger was not an event, but a meaning you assigned to it. Clarity begins with a simple but demanding discipline. Ask yourself, what are the objective facts here? Then ask, what am I adding? Often, what you are adding carries more weight than what actually occurred. This does not mean you ignore risk. It means you examine it accurately. Facts can be addressed. Interpretations can be corrected. When you identify the difference, anxiety loses some of its fuel. Most suffering is not in the event itself, but in the narrative built around it. When you challenge the narrative, the emotional intensity decreases. You are not denying reality. You are refining it. The more precisely you distinguish fact from story, the more stable your mind becomes. You reclaim control not by suppressing emotion, but by correcting distortion. Replace prediction with presence. Anxiety lives in projected futures. It constructs scenarios that have not happened and then reacts to them as if they were unfolding now. The mind moves ahead of reality, rehearsing possible losses, imagined failures, uncertain outcomes. Meanwhile, the present moment waits unattended. Prediction feels intelligent. It feels proactive. But most anxious prediction does not generate strategy. It generates tension. The body prepares for a future that does not yet exist. Energy is spent on hypotheticals while real responsibilities remain unaddressed. The Stoic correction is not naive optimism. It is disciplined presence. What is required of you now, not next month, not in the imagined worst case, now. Presence does not deny the future. It refuses to suffer it prematurely. When you anchor attention in the present duty, something stabilizes. There is clarity in concrete action. There is composure in defined responsibility. You cannot execute tomorrow's uncertainty today. You can execute today's task with precision. Anxiety convinces you that constant forecasting equals control. In truth, it fragments focus. The more attention you allocate to what might happen, the less power you retain over what is happening. Replace prediction with presence. Each time the mind accelerates into hypothetical territory, bring it back to the immediate step. What can be done here? What decision belongs to this moment? What effort is required now? This is not escapism. It is strategic allocation of mental energy. The future will arrive in its own time. When it does, you will meet it with the same disciplined reasoning you cultivate now. Peace begins when thought returns to its proper time frame. Anxiety weakens when the mind stops negotiating with imagined tomorrows and commits fully to present responsibility. Train the mind to tolerate uncertainty. Anxiety does not only fear danger, it fears uncertainty. The absence of guarantees unsettles the mind more than difficulty itself. When outcomes are undefined, the imagination rushes to fill the gap. It prefers a negative certainty over an open question. At least a defined fear feels solid. But uncertainty is not an error in reality. It is its natural state. No decision carries absolute assurance. No relationship offers permanent stability. No plan unfolds without variation. When you demand certainty before acting, you delay agency. When you resist uncertainty, you amplify tension. The Stoic approach does not attempt to eliminate unpredictability. It trains the mind to coexist with it. Amor fati is not passive resignation. It is cognitive stabilization. It means accepting the terrain before choosing your movement. You may not control the weather, but you control how you walk through it. Notice how anxiety intensifies when you insist on guarantees. You want proof that everything will work. You want confirmation that no harm will occur. You want clarity about outcomes that have not yet unfolded. This demand is impossible to satisfy, and the mind exhausts itself trying. Tolerance of uncertainty is built gradually. You allow small unknowns without rushing to close them. You act despite incomplete information. You observe discomfort without interpreting it as danger. Over time, the nervous system learns that uncertainty is survivable. When you stop resisting what cannot be fully predicted, internal friction decreases. The mind no longer treats every undefined variable as threat. Instead, it shifts focus toward adaptability. What you accept loses its power to destabilize you. Uncertainty does not disappear, but your reaction to it transforms. That transformation is where peace begins to grow. Response is always available. There will be moments when outcomes are unclear, when circumstances shift unexpectedly, when results do not align with your expectations. Anxiety thrives in these spaces because it equates unpredictability with helplessness. It tells you that if you cannot control the event, you have no power at all. This is the illusion that must be corrected. You may not control what happens, but you always control how you respond. That distinction is not philosophical comfort. It is structural freedom. When you understand that your reaction remains within your jurisdiction, agency returns immediately. External events are unstable by nature. Markets fluctuate. People change their minds. Plans fail. Health varies. None of this removes your capacity to choose your posture. You can respond with panic or with examination, with impulsive reaction or measured action, with resignation or with adjustment. Stoicism centers this truth. Freedom does not exist in event control. It exists in judgment. The event may be imposed. The interpretation is chosen. The response is constructed. When anxiety attempts to dominate, pause and ask, what response aligns with my principles? Not what reaction feels immediate, not what outcome I fear, but what posture reflects who I intend to be. This question shifts focus from uncertainty to identity. It returns authority to your internal framework. Even when you cannot shape the terrain, you shape your stance upon it. Anxiety weakens when you stop negotiating with outcomes and begin investing in response. The world may remain unstable, but your behavior does not have to mirror that instability. Control returns the moment you recognize that your response is never confiscated. It is always available. And every deliberate response reinforces internal strength. Calm is a skill, not a mood. Many people wait to feel calm before acting rationally. They believe peace must arrive first, and only then can they think clearly. But calm is not a spontaneous gift. It is trained stability. It is built through repetition, not granted by circumstance. Anxiety often convinces you that agitation is involuntary and calm is accidental. Yet every time you pause before reacting, every time you question a distorted thought, every time you redirect attention to what is within your control, you are practicing composure. These small corrections accumulate. Calm is constructed through disciplined correction of judgment. When you interrupt catastrophic thinking, you weaken its pattern. When you distinguish fact from interpretation, you reduce emotional intensity. When you return to present responsibility, you stabilize attention. These are not isolated acts. They are repetitions that shape mental architecture. Stoic virtue is not emotional suppression. It is emotional governance. The first reaction may surge, but the trained mind does not surrender to it automatically. Over time, the interval between impression and response becomes smoother. The body still reacts, but the mind does not escalate. Peace is not the absence of disturbance. It is the ability to remain steady within it. This steadiness strengthens with practice. Just as physical training builds endurance, cognitive discipline builds composure. You do not wait to feel calm. You act calmly, and calm becomes familiar. The more frequently you correct anxious patterns, the less intense they become. Not because anxiety disappears, but because your stability increases. Anxiety thrives when calm is treated as a rare state. It weakens when calm becomes habitual, and habit is built through repetition. Discipline your inner dialogue before it disciplines you. Anxiety rarely speaks loudly at first. It whispers, a small doubt about your competence, a subtle suspicion about someone's intention, a quiet forecast of failure. These thoughts seem harmless in isolation, but when repeated without examination, they form a dominant internal dialogue. And that dialogue shapes perception long before reality confirms anything. Every day, you are speaking to yourself internally, commenting on your actions, interpreting other people's behavior, predicting outcomes, evaluating risk. Most of this conversation runs automatically. If it is undisciplined, it becomes biased toward threat. The mind scans for potential error and exaggerates its significance. Over time, this internal language hardens into belief. If you consistently tell yourself that you are unprepared, you will hesitate. If you consistently assume rejection, you will withdraw. If you consistently predict loss, You will operate defensively. The body responds not to events, but to repeated narrative. Stoicism demands scrutiny of this dialogue, not suppression, not blind positivity. Scrutiny. Ask, what evidence supports this thought? Is this judgment rational or is it habit? Does this internal statement increase clarity or does it amplify fear? When you begin disciplining your internal language, something subtle shifts. The mind becomes less dramatic, less absolute. Instead of saying, "This will go wrong," you say, "This may be challenging, and I will respond accordingly." Instead of declaring, "I cannot handle this," you say, "I have handled difficulty before." This is not self-deception. It is recalibration. The goal is not to inflate confidence artificially, but to align interpretation with reality. Reality is rarely as catastrophic as anxious narration suggests. Your inner dialogue either reinforces fear or reinforces reason. When left unchecked, it trains the nervous system toward vigilance. When disciplined, it trains the nervous system toward stability. You may not control the first anxious thought, but you control the second. The first is automatic. The second is deliberate. If you let the second thought agree with the first without examination, anxiety gains reinforcement. If you question it, you weaken the chain. Repeated rational correction rewires perception. The mind learns that not every signal requires alarm. The body learns that not every uncertainty signals danger. Calm becomes more accessible because interpretation becomes more measured. You become what you repeatedly tell yourself about the world. If your inner dialogue is catastrophic, the world will appear hostile. If your inner dialogue is structured, the world becomes navigable. Discipline your internal language before it disciplines your behavior. Because if you do not govern the conversation within, anxiety will. Stop negotiating with fear. Anxiety often feels powerful because you treat it as a voice of authority. It speaks and you negotiate. It suggests danger and you compromise. It proposes withdrawal and you adjust your plans. Over time, this silent negotiation becomes habitual. Fear presents a possibility and you restructure your behavior around it without even realizing. Notice the pattern. You consider an opportunity. Immediately, a fearful scenario appears. What if you fail? What if you embarrass yourself? What if something goes wrong? Instead of evaluating the thought objectively, you begin negotiating with it. Maybe I should wait. Maybe this is not the right time. Maybe I am not ready. Fear does not always demand retreat directly. It suggests caution, disguised as wisdom. It invites delay, disguised as prudence. And the more you entertain these negotiations, without scrutiny, the more authority it accumulates. Stoicism does not instruct you to silence fear through force. It instructs you to evaluate it. Fear is an impression. An impression is not a command. It is a proposal. When you treat it as law, you surrender control of direction. Stop negotiating with fear as if it were your superior. Instead, interrogate it. What exactly are you predicting? What evidence supports that outcome? If the worst-case scenario occurred, what action would be required? Often, when examined calmly, fear shrinks from absolute catastrophe to manageable difficulty. Anxiety gains momentum through avoidance. Each time you restructure your life to accommodate fear without examination, you reinforce its credibility. The nervous system learns that the fear was valid because you obeyed it. Avoidance becomes confirmation. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is refusal to allow fear to dictate policy. You may feel hesitation. You may feel discomfort. But you do not restructure your entire trajectory around that feeling without rational review. When you begin acting according to principle rather than fear-based negotiation, something important happens. Anxiety loses predictive dominance. It can still suggest scenarios, but it no longer sets the agenda. You shift from defensive living to deliberate living. You stop shrinking opportunities to match your comfort zone. You expand your tolerance instead. The discomfort remains temporary. The growth remains structural. Each time you refuse to renegotiate your standards because of fear, you strengthen internal authority. The mind learns that fear is not fatal. It is tolerable. It becomes background noise instead of central command. Peace does not come from eliminating fearful thoughts. It comes from refusing to grant them governing power. When fear speaks, you listen carefully. You evaluate, and then you decide based on reason. Reduce the need for certainty. Anxiety feeds on the demand for guarantees. It convinces you that before you act, before you relax, before you commit, you must know exactly how everything will unfold. It whispers that uncertainty is danger, that incomplete information is threat, that ambiguity must be resolved immediately. The more you obey this demand, the more fragile your peace becomes. Consider how often you delay decisions because you are waiting for clarity that may never come. You want reassurance from others. You want confirmation from circumstances. You want evidence that nothing unexpected will happen. Yet life does not operate under contracts of certainty. It unfolds in probabilities, not promises. The Stoic mind accepts this without bitterness. It does not interpret uncertainty as hostility. It recognizes it as the natural condition of existence. When you reduce your need for certainty, you reduce the friction between your expectations and reality. Anxiety intensifies when you insist that the future must be predictable in order for you to feel safe. But safety built on prediction is unstable. One unexpected change, and the structure collapses. True stability comes from adaptability, not foresight. Ask yourself honestly, what exactly do I need to know right now in order to act responsibly? Often, the answer is much less than your anxious mind demands. You do not need full visibility of the path. You need enough clarity to take the next rational step. When you act without complete certainty and survive the outcome, your nervous system learns resilience. Each experience of tolerated ambiguity expands your threshold. You begin to understand that uncertainty does not equal catastrophe. It equals openness. Reducing the need for certainty does not mean acting recklessly. It means acting proportionally, gathering reasonable information, making a deliberate decision, accepting that variables remain, moving forward anyway. The mind that demands absolute certainty becomes paralyzed. The mind that accepts partial knowledge becomes agile. Anxiety weakens when you stop demanding guarantees from a world that does not provide them. You do not control whether events will unfold as planned. You control whether you will require perfect prediction before living. When you loosen that requirement, you regain mental flexibility. Peace grows not from knowing the future, but from trusting your capacity to respond to it. The more you practice acting within uncertainty, the less threatening it becomes. Certainty is comforting, but rare. Adaptability is demanding, but powerful. Choose adaptability. and anxiety begins to lose its leverage. Stop identifying with every thought that passes. Anxiety becomes overwhelming when you treat every thought as a reflection of who you are. A fearful idea appears, and you conclude, "I am an anxious person." A doubt surfaces, and you interpret it as weakness. A negative prediction arises, and you assume it reveals truth about your future. In this subtle shift, thoughts move from being events in the mind to being definitions of identity. But a thought is not identity. It is a mental occurrence. It appears, it carries emotional weight, and if left unexamined, it attaches itself to your sense of self. The more you identify with these thoughts, the more permanent they feel. What was once a passing mental event becomes a personal narrative. Stoicism invites a different posture. Observe the impression before agreeing with it. When a thought arises, pause and ask, is this a reflection of reality or simply a mental pattern repeating? This creates distance, and distance creates freedom. If you believe that every anxious thought is an accurate description of you, you reinforce anxiety at the identity level. You no longer question it. You accept it as part of who you are. From that position, change feels impossible because you are not challenging a pattern. You are challenging your own self-concept. Instead, recognize that the mind generates thoughts automatically. Some are rational, some are distorted, some are neutral. They do not all deserve allegiance. You can witness them without absorbing them. When you say, "I am having the thought that something will go wrong," instead of "something will go wrong," the shift is subtle but powerful. You acknowledge the presence of the thought without surrendering to its conclusion. The mind learns that it can produce ideas without immediate obedience. Over time, this practice reduces fusion between thought and identity. Anxiety may still generate predictions, but they no longer define you. They are examined, weighed, and either dismissed or acted upon rationally. Peace does not require the absence of anxious thoughts. It requires separation from them. When you stop identifying with every mental fluctuation, your internal environment becomes less volatile. Identity anchored in reason is stable. Identity anchored in passing emotion is unstable. The more you ground yourself in deliberate judgment rather than spontaneous thought, the less authority anxiety retains. You are not the storm of your thinking. You are the observer capable of directing it. When that distinction becomes habitual, anxiety loses its power to define who you are. Anxiety loses authority when it is observed. Anxiety gains strength when it is fused with identity. When a thought appears and you immediately accept it as truth, it becomes command. It dictates behavior. It narrows perception. It accelerates reaction. You no longer observe anxiety. You become it. But there is a decisive shift available. You can witness the thought instead of merging with it. The moment you say, "This is an anxious thought," you create distance. That distance is not denial. It is clarity. You are no longer inside the storm without perspective. You are examining the storm from a stable point. Observation weakens emotional fusion. When you notice the pattern without immediately acting on it, anxiety loses automatic authority. It may still speak. It may still propose scenarios, but it no longer commands obedience. Stoicism trains this internal witness. The impression arrives. The mind pauses. Judgment is evaluated. Response is chosen deliberately. This sequence transforms experience. Anxiety becomes data, not direction. You are not your thoughts. Thoughts are events within the mind. They appear, persist, and pass. When you observe them without attachment, you prevent escalation. You interrupt the chain that leads from interpretation to panic. Distance creates composure. The more frequently you practice observation, the more stable your internal environment becomes. Anxiety may visit, but it does not govern the structure of your decisions. When thought is witnessed, it cannot dominate. When judgment is examined, it cannot distort unchecked. Authority returns not through suppression, but through awareness. The quiet return to center. Anxiety is not a flaw in you. It is a signal misinterpreted, a pattern repeated, a responsibility misplaced. For a long time, it may have felt like an enemy invading your peace. But what you have seen is different. It is not chaos. It is cognition applied without discipline. You tried to silence it, to outrun it, to eliminate it completely. Yet the more you fought it, the more central it became. The shift was never about erasing anxiety. It was about mastering the structure beneath it. You learned to separate responsibility from illusion, to distinguish preparation from rumination, to slow down urgency and examine interpretation, to replace imagined futures with present duty, to tolerate uncertainty instead of resisting it, to claim your response even when outcomes were unclear, to practice calm until it became stable, to observe thought instead of merging with it. This is not dramatic transformation. It is structural correction. Anxiety may still appear at times, but it no longer governs unchecked. It no longer dictates your posture. It no longer defines your identity. Peace is not something granted by predictable circumstances. It is built through disciplined perception. Control is not domination of events. It is sovereignty over judgment. The world remains uncertain. Conversations may still be ambiguous. Outcomes may still vary. But your mind no longer negotiates with fear as authority. It examines it. It filters it. It responds with reason. Anxiety may still visit, but it no longer governs.